good people, for your thoughts and non-prayers. And welcome back to another episode of the Nonprofits. Remember, this show is a product of the ACA, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. Today, I am your conductor, Laura Magee from Skeptic Hangout, and I have with me today two incredibly awesome guests. So let's start with Ro. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much for having me. I am from the Washington, D.C. area. I am a artist, writer, musician, and I'm the director of Black Nonbelievers of D.C.
Awesome. That is really cool. And you actually did one of the articles that we are going to be reading today. So thank you
Yes,
for that. Yeah. And
yes,
we'll get to that one in just a little bit.
sweet.
Yeah, Nate, tell me a little about yourself as well.
Hey, Laura. I am a host of Secular Sexuality on Thursdays at 7 o'clock Central. Tune in, folks.
Awesome.
And this is now my third time, count them 1, 2, 3 times on the Nonprofits, twice in a row. So I'm calling that a win. And
Heck yeah.
it's my first time being on a show with Laura and Bro. So
I
this
know,
is
and I'm
just,
so excited.
this is a red letter day for me. This is amazing.
You know what's really cool about the three of us is we all do such different stuff and different content, but
Mhm.
we all have something really unique and awesome to offer to the atheist activist scene. So this is really exciting. I can't wait to see how our voices all kind of intermix today. So with that being said, let's just get straight into the first article. Nate, why don't you go
Let's.
ahead and give us a rundown?
Yes, I would absolutely love to, because the Catholic Church just seems to have no shortage of bad press these days. This article comes to us from the Christian Post, and basically is detailing the predicament of one Lynn Starkey, who sued the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Indianapolis for, guess what? Firing her because they found out she was gay.
And more specifically, because she
Yeah.
was married to another woman.
Well,
She,
yes,
yeah, she
yes.
was, she
Yeah.
was gay
Because
and
that's
married.
absolutely it.
Yeah.
That's going to be their cop out, right? Is that no, it wasn't because she's gay. It's because she's in a same sex marriage. Right? We
Marriage.
don't.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
stressed. Yeah.
Yes, we don't hate gay people. No, we love the sinner. We just hate the sin, because
Yes, and
that
it's against our
absolutely,
policy, right?
absolutely makes sense. You know, this woman who's worked there since 1979.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
I didn't
She
pick
worked.
that up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was
bro.
born in
She's
78.
Yeah,
yeah. I was
so
born in
she worked there
79. So yeah.
as many years as you are old. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, and then they
What?
all of a sudden find out that she is in a same-sex relationship and gone.
Oh, that makes everything worse. That
Yeah.
I don't know why I missed that in my skimming of the article, because I thought that she was some 28-year-old teacher, and she's kind of like popped into town and got a teaching job, and no, she's been there like our
Mhm.
entire lives. She's a part
Mhm.
of the church community. She has served, she has taught, she has contributed, she has value until she
Absolutely.
gets
Yeah.
married.
So it's interesting that you say that, because on the one hand, I absolutely think it wouldn't make a shred of difference whether you've worked there like one day or whether you've worked there for a decade or 2 decades.
True.
That sort of treatment isn't okay. But on the same hand, like what you were saying, they talk in the article about all the stuff that she contributed
Mm.
in terms of her guidance, counseling, and
Mhm.
her contributions to the
The children.
to the children and to the congregation,
Mhm.
right? And all of her volunteer work. So she was a very active contributing member to this organization.
That's a
And that,
betrayal.
yeah, that to me really struck me as, it's almost, I mean, it's not good either way, but it's almost like adding insult to injury, or like just pouring lemon juice on the wound.
Yeah. I think that's a betrayal. Do you want to go first? Because I had kind of put some thoughts together, so I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I have
Well,
some
let's
thoughts.
get out there with the reasoning of this federal judge, Richard Young, who determined that when the state interferes with these types of employment decisions, it violates the free exercise and establishment clause. So The minister, and I want everybody listen real close to what is being said in a federal court decision, right? The ministerial exception is not limited to claims of religious discrimination. It bars all claims of discrimination under Title VII, including discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Like, this is basically Thunderdome for religious bigotry. As long as your Sky Daddy hates the same people you hate, you can do whatever you please. And let's face it, Sky Daddy always hates the same people you hate. Come on.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that really caught my attention first when I was reading the article, was that he kind of the judge made it really sound like the government and the judicial system can't even touch religious organizations, period, which I don't think should be the case. I think it's one thing to allow somebody the free exercise to believe what they want, or to make their own choices based on their religion, but to now start impacting somebody else's life, that's when we're talking about like human rights and civil rights and discrimination and stuff like that. And I think that I just don't think that the Establishment Clause has any business covering that kind of thing.
So I'm sympathetic to these ministerial exemptions insofar as, if you have a church school or a madrasa, as the Fox News crowd says, if you have an institution where you are insular in your teaching and all that, I'm personally sympathetic to those administrators being able to say, these teachers are an extension of our ministry, and so they need to abide by whatever our arbitrary rules are. But there's so much that's still wrong with it, because when you think about labor laws, I wonder, are churches are they exempt from labor laws? Like when you go into the workroom or the kitchen, there's those things that are posted that you have to be able to, have this, grievance or this method for making a complaint. And, you can't work someone excessively to the bone, for, 100 hours a week. And, there are certain things that you're supposed to be able to do and not do to your employees. And I think that if churches if they have to follow those kinds of rules, for labor laws, if they have to follow some sort of building requirements in terms of the way the buildings are constructed, they have to be up to code. They have to have a certain amount of fire exits. They have to have, sprinklers. And like, if you have to follow some laws, I don't understand why are we drawing the lines at these types of things, especially for teachers like this. And it shouldn't matter if they've been there one day or 41 years, but especially for the people who've been there 41 years. You know what I mean? I mean, clearly she's okay to be a part of their community. As a teacher, she's okay to be a part of what they, give to their students. So that's, while I'm sympathetic to them making their own rules, I also see that there's still something problematic about where they're drawing the line. But I think that even if it's legal, it's not just, like, so, okay,
Right.
let's say it's legal. That's still not right, and, Catholic, the Catholic Charities and so many of these Catholic organizations, they like to fall back on, well, we provide this and we do this and we feed the homeless and all this kind of stuff. Okay. It's really counterintuitive to say our institutions are legitimate because we provide services, to people in need. And on the other hand, be putting people in a situation where they actually are in need because you fired them and they don't have a way to make a living. So it's like, it's really contradictory to kind of try to argue both ends. We want our religious freedom to be able to fire gay people who get married. But it's good because when they don't have a job and they need something to eat, we also have the soup kitchen so they can come in.
It is a bit of a double standard. Yeah. What I hear you saying is that the compassion only goes so far within their moral framework, and then outside that moral framework, the compassion sort of dies.
And it's so conditional too.
Right.
It's conditional not on her apparently being gay or lesbian. It's conditional upon her being, having, her life on her own terms and being able to not be some sad, repressed, you know, sort of solemn, kind of loveless gay woman, you know.
Or hiding a part of her in order to keep
Yeah.
her employment going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the biggest question that I had was, I guess, why now? Like, did they just not know about it and they just found out about it? Did she keep it in the closet and then suddenly decide to get married and the marriage was public? Like, in my opinion, if she was gainfully employed and they were happy having her as an employee and she was positively contributing to the organization, why just now is she suddenly an issue where she can't?
I have a guess.
Okay.
I'm going to guess that having been there for 41 or 42 years, she actually felt comfortable and she felt like she was a part of their community.
And she may have said something.
And she may have said something because she, by implication, thought that they were cool with her. And she found out.
I mean, that's as good a guess as any, but that's actually a very, what do you call it? Like a good, gracious guess, in the sense that there was no like sneaking around or, oh, somebody outed her or whatever. That's a good, like, hey, I felt comfortable and I said something.
She actually thought those folks were her friends.
It's a distinct possibility. When I first read the article, and Nate, did you want to, I have something more I wanted to add, but I want to give you a chance to speak up first.
Oh no, I mean, I've certainly got more to say about the ecclesiastical exception. I have less sympathy for it than Ro does, because I was reading the Supreme Court decision from 2012. Now, this was the first time that the Supreme Court actually touched and sunk their teeth into the ministerial exception, and again, I'm going into and I'm reading these judges' words, and it is so insidious what they're actually saying. So Justice Clarence Thomas in 2012 was talking about how these churches can determine who qualifies as a minister. Okay. So this is, can if I find out my janitor's gay, can I, let's rewrite our terms and policies. And he was a minister, so now he's got to go because
You're right.
Right. So I quote Justice Clarence Thomas, defer to a religious organization's good faith understanding, end quote, of what qualifies as a minister.
That assumes that they have good faith.
Exactly my point. There's no such thing as good faith, and the Catholic Church has demonstrated time and again that they will not exercise it, right? Like, you've got the cover-up of the Indigenous children in Canada. You've got, that whole sex scandal things.
They exercise it at their discretion, is what you're really saying. So when it benefits them, that's when they'll kick it in and use it. And then when it doesn't benefit them, that's when it's kind of like, well.
And it's just a coincidence that it always benefits them in the argument against gay people. It seems to be like it just you spin the wheel at Wheel of Fortune, you always land on bankrupt, just every time you spin it. And it's interesting, like that's not a coincidence. And to add to your point, Nate, in addition to those two cases, there's the most recent one in Philadelphia with the whatever the Catholic Charities or the organization there, where they were essentially ordered to or given permission to exempt or prohibit gay couples from applying for adoption. Because and being subsidized by the city of Philadelphia. Essentially, Philadelphia can't make a rule to say that you have to open your adoption process open to gay men and women or gay couples.
And even in that case, they just kind of kicked the can down the road, because in the judgment for the Philadelphia case, they were like, well, you could have given them an exception. If you'd wanted to. So, but you didn't. So, we're not actually going to give a clear ruling that actually will serve as useful precedent for subsequent cases. Right. They're like, we ain't touching this.
It was very case specific. So it's like they granted them that right, but the next person who comes and sues from whatever other city could make the same argument, and perhaps get the same benefit. My other thing, and I hear what you're saying. I'm being generous in my sympathy, but I agree with you. It's a really inequitable sort of and arbitrary sort of line to draw. You could imagine, you hire a contractor to come cut the grass in front of the church, and they could be ministers as well if you find out that the contracting service is owned by a gay person, or the person cutting the grass is gay. God forbid they be cutting grass, like,
And
how
oh
dare
my
you?
goodness, yeah.
Oh, they'd find a way. They'd be like, "Oh, he's working close to the sign, and the sign says come in on Sundays at 10 o'clock, and so
Yeah,
that's directed to that's our ministry. So
yeah.
you're fired."
And
No, and I mean,
it's not hyperbole. But go ahead, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say there's so many other reasons to end employment too, like, oh, budget cuts, we just can't afford to pay you to cut our grass
Hmm.
or whatever. So it doesn't even have to be the ministerial. Like there's just so many other reasons that
Hmm.
I mean, if you're talking that in the weeds in terms of like the employees that are more what do you call peripheral, right?
Hmm.
It's a
Mhm.
lot easier to fire one of those peripheral employees than it is to say fire a minister. Like you need a more important reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, yeah, it gets to be ridiculous where all they really need to say is, we don't need your services anymore. Thank you. And
Yeah.
then that's it. There's no need for explanation.
Well, what about
Um,
is there a ministerial exception that they invoke when it comes to the child molestations? Like, do they fire those people, or do you know what I mean? Like, this is really just selective about gay people. Like, you all aren't firing the people who are molesting the children.
No, they move
right.
them around. They're
Yeah.
completely complicit. They don't want to fire those people. So it's just like you guys are saying, right? It's completely discretionary, and it's
Mhm.
completely wrong. Needs to go.
My other thought was, in addition to all of this, this case and all the ones we've discussed, they do the job of continuing to objectify gay people, LGBT folks, sexually, which is to say, one of the reasons that it is sort of burned into our neurology at this point that gay is synonymous with the way you have sex and how much of it you have is
Right.
because of this kind of focus, hyper focus on people's sexuality. Um, when we think about left-handed people, we don't think about, oh my God, they write with their left hand. Oh my, can you imagine? Or someone plays, I'm a musician, and every now and then, like my drummer in Spain that I play with all the time, he's a left-handed drummer. So the whole arrangement of the drum set is different. It's hard to sort of figure out, like, oh, he's a left-handed drummer. Like, it's so we get
We just
so
let it be what it is. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just like, and then you get to these, people like us who point this stuff out, often run into folks who say, well, why are you so critical about, the church, and why is everybody so obsessed about, criticizing the way where they have sex or whatever? It's because of this kind of stuff. Like, every time you focus on someone's sex practices, and particularly when you don't know that person, you don't know anything about that person, and you're not interested in any of the other attributes or parts of who they are as a whole. You just
Right.
reduce them to sexual objects. That's sexual
And
objectification.
you vilify what they do in the bedroom,
Right.
even though it's quite arbitrary. So like what a gay female couple does in the bedroom may be far less kinky or
Right.
taboo or whatever than what a hetero couple would do in the bedroom,
Right.
right? And I mean, it's completely arbitrary. Like they may not have penetrative sex at all
Right.
for all the person knows, right?
They may not be having, they may have a loveless marriage.
Or asexual marriage, not necessarily loveless, but
Or a loveless
sexless.
Or
or
both.
asexual
Yeah.
marriage. I mean, they may not. I mean, it could be either one. Like, they could be asexual as a couple, or they could have a marriage where things have just kind of, the flame has gone out.
Oh, I
And
see what you mean. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, they have a marriage where it's just a accommodationalist or companionate
Or
marriage.
contractual. Yeah, yeah. Companionship.
And yet they're getting fired because of the way they have sex. It's like, what? You don't know anything about me.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're going to hold me to that sexual standard, what about the sexual deviancy of hetero couples? Like, I'm sorry, shouldn't you be in each and every one of their bedrooms making sure that all those hetero teachers all have the right kind of biblical, godly sex? Right? Because homosexuality is not the only form of bad sex, right? Like, there's all these rules.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I would just like to point out that if these judgments make you mad, folks, especially in the United States, over 2/3 of the current federal bench was appointed by, I don't even want to say his name, but I'll give you a hint. He's
Yeah.
got orange hair and he thinks he won an election, right? Like he appointed so many judges. He packed the Supreme Court, right? So elections have consequences, right? Like, get out and vote.
If you can, man, that's
If
another
you
subject.
participate in the process as
Yeah.
much as you can.
Yeah.
Participate. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's sad. I would also just add, and this is a message for gay, lesbian folks of the community, which I'm a part of myself. You know, I hate to bust people's bubble, but you have to mind the company that you keep. And you cannot get so comfortable that you think it doesn't matter who you are and you think that your identity is not political. Your identity is absolutely political, especially if you're working in a church, or let alone a Catholic church. Because if anybody gets a lawsuit, it's going up to the Catholic Supreme Court, essentially. And so the way they have been ruling on all of these cases for at least the last 6 or 7 years, they're ruling in the favor of religion like 80% of the time or so. So, it's very probable that you're not going to prevail if you do like Lynn Starkley, unfortunately, because the cards are not in your favor, partly because what you said, Nate, and with, just with the disposition of these judges who happen to also be Catholic. It's just kind of like,
I'm really glad you brought that up, because when I had first started writing my notes for this particular article, my tendency is always to try and play devil's advocate. So I try and kind of write like the what if, right? And so my first initial thing was, why work for an organization that doesn't support your own personal morals and values? And I was a little bit like devil's advocate towards the organization about like hey, if they have these rules that they're allowed to post where they can be that limited on their employment, why would you want to work for them in the first place? But then I think about what you're saying, and I think the more and more and more that these things are publicized and talked about, the more and more people do work for those organizations and are fired. It really sucks for that individual, and it's wrong. But that drives social change. It drives the conversation.
Yeah.
So the more we see this, the more we talk about it, the more that people can push back against these organizations even having these limitations to begin with. Because if she didn't even work there, or if she chose to resign before getting married, we wouldn't even be hearing about it. And so they'd have these awful like civil rights infractions, right? And the everyday person wouldn't even know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
yeah,
And Lynn
it's really
Starkey
sad.
may not have had a choice as to where she worked. Like, to your point, Laura,
True. Yeah.
she may not have wanted to work for the Catholic Church. She probably just needed a job, right? It kind of reminds me of that when retail workers or minimum wage workers are like, I want more money, I want better pay. It's like, well, if you don't like it, just go get a better job.
Get a better job.
Well, exactly. Like, there might not have been one.
Yeah. Right. No, that's a very good point. And I think about it like, think about the military, for example. Like, if I were to want to make my 20 years and say at some point through that process, I decided that I have some sort of value that goes against that employment, I would want to try and stay employed as long as possible to get my time, right? So she may very well have wanted to look at how long she'd been in. She may have been looking toward retirement or
I was about to
stability,
say,
not starting
Probably.
over again from scratch, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of reasons at that point in her career to want to keep being employed there. Yeah. So
it also
yeah.
makes-
Oh, go ahead.
No, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say it kind of made my initial observations of the devil's advocate. It definitely falsifies it pretty quickly.
I also wonder, I mean, to the hypothetical of her, in a retirement age, I wonder if because of this ruling, I wonder if in addition to the firing, she lost retirement benefits. Does anybody have any idea?
That would be something whole new to look into. Yeah, maybe that's something we can do more research on and follow up with.
And then if so, how would you, or how could the church, okay, let's grant him that they have the best discretion available. How would they, could you prorate her retirement benefits back to the year where she got married and let her keep what she had before she got gay married?
How about not? How about giving her retirement up until the day she was fired?
I'd be in favor of her getting all of her things. Get all of your things. But I'm just saying, since it was clear that she wasn't married at some point, like she was at some point, she was employed there and not married
and single,
and
or not married.
So how do you, let's just imagine she doesn't, she has an issue getting retirement. Like, how would you sort of divvy out what she's eligible for based on her gay marriage as a minister in the church?
That's a good question. And we do have to move on to the next article, but I want to give Nate a quick chance to respond to it. And I would say that like, just my quick observation is, if it was a firing that resulted in her not getting retirement or benefits, that would just make this situation so much worse. Yeah. But Nate, what are your closing thoughts on that?
Elections have consequences, people. These judges were appointed by the orange orangutan, right? And we need to make sure that never ever happens again. And I'm Canadian, and I still care because I'm like peering over the fence, and I'm like seeing what my neighbors
we're like
are
good
up to,
neighbors.
It's scary, man. Please don't do that again. You're scaring us.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're gonna do some really quick what would you call it? We're gonna build up the ACA here for a second before moving on to our next article. We are currently at 8.86 thousand subscribers. Okay, so if we, I know, right? And if we reach 10,000 subscribers, then we can start doing fundraisers and stuff for the ACA. So if you have not already done so, ladies and gentlemen, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit the bell so that you remember to get notified every single time one of our new episodes comes on. It helps support us get to 10,000. If you've already subscribed, dude, send this link to a friend or a family member or that neighbor you don't like anyone, everyone. Just send the invites out so that we can hit that mark.
If we get to 9,000 subscribers, I will bust out my Christopher Walken accent on my next nonprofits.
Do it. Okay, there you have it, people. Christopher Walken, 9,000 subscribers. Let's do it. Okay, we're almost there anyway. 8.86. That's not far off. We also have a new YouTube channel for the ACA. It's called the Atheist Experience Network. So this is really cool. It's like a one-stop shop for all the ACA shows in a podcast form. So you can just go binge all your favorite shows, everything from like the nonprofits here, or the Atheist Experience, Truth Wanted, all of them. So if you want to subscribe there, check out tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. Okay, so lastly, before we get to Article 2, we have a lot of social media fan outlets. So if you're on Facebook, join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/nonprofitslive. And if you're into Discord, check us out at tiny.cc/ACA Discord. So yeah, check us out, subscribe. Let's keep this ball rolling, people. In the meantime, Ro, you have written an article. Yes, you wrote an article for thehumanist.com. I'm very impressed. So go ahead and introduce your article.
Thank you very much. I wrote an article, that actually dates back to January of this year. Haitian Independence Day is early January. I believe it's January 2nd or 3rd. And I should have had that as a solid fact right now, but it's in the first couple of days of January. The point is it's early January. So I wrote an article about the meaning of resistance and revolution, using the Haitian Revolution as a backdrop. And also on the heels of 2020, this was the end of 2020, right? Right after New Year's Day, and the end of what was very much an iconic year in resistance politics and movement politics around all sorts of issues, but among the most high profile, George Floyd and everything that came out of that. And then the election and how George Floyd and the coronavirus and all that kind of stuff played into, you know, the election and just our lives living inside and so forth. And the humanist came along, American Humanist Association came along in the last couple of months and asked me to contribute some work, and so I kind of brushed this one off and submitted it. And so it is an article basically, you know, discussing what we can learn as activists and as humanists from the Haitian Revolution as a political and otherwise anti-colonial movement and organizing sort of lesson. Because I wrote this to organizers and to people who are interested in particularly using that language as a part of their organizing. So the use of revolutionary language as a tool to organize was really the motivation. How do we appropriate that language respectfully and being well informed, particularly as it relates to anti-Blackness and resistance movement?
One thing I really, really liked about how you approached the article is that you talk in terms of like people seeing like revolution as like some fun thing that you do to promote change in the world, right?
Yeah,
And it's all
yeah.
like it just pumps you up and it's all flowery and pretty. And then you discuss like just the real ugly tragedy that
Yeah.
is revolution and like what it really looks like.
The
And
reason, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say you really contrast what it really is versus how people imagine it. And I think that's
Yeah.
important.
So there's, oh God, so you really will have to stop me from talking about this, because this is like complete, like, you know, swampland of nerdiness for me, and history. I'm from the Virgin Islands, so I'm a Caribbean American. And anybody who doesn't know where that is, we are, as I like to say in Spanish, a la derecha de Puerto Rico. So we're the right of Puerto Rico. There's a little group of islands called the Virgin Islands that Christopher Columbus named after the Virgin. The name is escaping me. It's a Catholic. It's, speaking of Catholic, it's a Catholic sort of icon of this.
So like the Virgin Mary, but some like a different.
Yeah, and I remember it sometimes. When I'm going to sleep tonight, it'll pop in my head after we're finished talking.
It'll be 5 minutes after the show, Ro.
Yeah.
Right. We'll have to throw it in the live chat. Okay, on Sunday we'll throw it in the live chat.
Oh yeah, Ursula. I believe it's Ursula. 11,000 virgins there's some sort of story around Ursula and 11,000 virgins. I believe I'm saying it correctly. And he named all of these little islands the Virgin Islands. Once again, virginity is such a prize, you know, in religion. And so, you know, a lot of things are about virginity. And so there are two groups of Virgin Islands. There's one from the British, and then there's now the U.S. Virgin Islands, which was formerly a colony of Denmark. And I say all of this to say I'm interested in Caribbean history. I'm particularly interested in it because of the time that I grew up in when I was studying history in school was the early 90s. And in 1492, you've heard the story, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Yeah. And in 1992, when I was in middle school, was the quincentennial of that voyage. And I was able to live at a time where there were a lot of recreations of that history. And if you might remember, there were boats that were sort of replicas of the Niña Pinta and Santa Maria that sailed from Barcelona back to the islands. And there were all these documentaries. And I was just soaking it all up and kind of contextualizing my experience growing up in the islands with what I was learning in these documentaries about the Caribbean, and getting some truth lessons. And one of the biggest truth lessons that we all can learn is Hispaniola. First of all, before we talk about anything, Hispaniola is the first, well, let me center them first. The Taino, the Arawak, Those were the natives, the indigenous people of Hispaniola, Taino, Arawak, and also Caribs and Cacique people, but mostly Taino and Arawak in Hispaniola were the folks who were inhabited there. Christopher Columbus met them, and he, from the very beginning, talked about those people in a combination of admiring ways and also some very condescending ways, in which he was already scoping them out for extracting mineral wealth and scoping them out for slave labor. So the economy.
I want to interrupt you right there then.
Mhm.
Yeah, because we're talking about slavery, and we always relate slavery back to Black slavery, which is very true. Like there were many, many, many people taken from Africa into the Americas. But you just touched on something, and I'll let you continue, but I want to take a moment. You just touched on something important, that slaves came from more than just the Black races. So now you're talking about the races that were indigenous to the islands and
Yes.
to America, and by America, like South America, Central America, not just North America.
Yeah. When we talk about New World slavery, which is essentially from this period on, the late mid 15th century into late beyond, we're talking about the beginning of a racialized slavery in a surplus economic model of not just capital gain, but surplus capital gain and the use of bodies to essentially build that value, surplus value, and it started actually before Christopher Columbus landed. It started with the Portuguese sailing up and down Africa, and that's a whole nother thing. But when they got to Hispaniola, they already had that model in place,
Right.
and so it wasn't that it started in the Caribbean. It was sort of like refined in the Caribbean all through the and especially through the 16th and then 17th century. There's so much that I could go into. I'm going to try and just skip a little ahead. So Spanish had that island. Christopher Columbus had that island. They pitted Indian groups against each other. They tried to act as if they were going to be friendly and tried to make certain deals and accommodations. The first colony was actually set up in Hispaniola. It's called La Navidad in Santo Domingo, what is now Santo Domingo. The whole island was called Santo Domingo. It was Hispaniola, which was named for Spain, then later Santo Domingo. At some point in the late 17th century, the French basically kind of posted up there, and essentially there was an agreement that they'd have that half of the island. And that part was named Saint Domingue, which is still Santo Domingo. It's just the French version of Santo Domingo, Saint Domingue. And throughout the late 17th century, and then certainly up into the 18th, and then eventually the 19th century, but especially 18th and 17th century, Haiti, well, what we call Haiti at that time was Saint Domingue, was extracting and producing great wealth. It was Hispaniola is a beautiful country. It's a beautiful landmass, and it is rich. It's mountainous. It's just it's really a wonderful place. And the Tainos had called it Haiti, and so just fast forward. Haiti is essentially a recognition of the original name of that island that the Tainos and the Arawaks had. But what I want to say is surplus capital or economic value through slave labor, through violence, through sexual violence, through death, and through exploitation, and all of these things is what ultimately led up to the Haitian Revolution. That and religious dissent. So we're all non-believers, atheists, and so forth. Religious dissent is a big part of it.
It's a thing, yeah.
It's
because religion drives a lot of what people like. Their justifications.
Well, this is in specific in Haiti. The dissent was so. Haiti used to, I'm going to go back to Saint Domingue. Saint Domingue was once known as the Pearl of the Caribbean. It was making more money for France than all of the English colonies in the United States at that
Yeah,
time.
it was something like 50% of France's GDP was coming from that one island.
Yes,
Like,
Yeah,
think
that is
about that.
yes,
Like,
insane.
that
Yeah, that's
is
insane.
yes.
50%.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. I mean, you know, people when you look at the history and you start to study it, you know, you will hear that it was all this great wealth and great wealth, and yes, that's true. But when you think about how that wealth was produced, it becomes less impressive, and
It's
it's just like,
tainted.
wow,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
and
really
that wealth wasn't reinvested into the island. It wasn't reinvested into infrastructure or, you know, public services or anything like that. It was all going straight back to Napoleon's coffers, right?
Well, and that speaks a
yeah,
lot to colonialism in general. When we talk about like, well, why
Yeah,
are certain nations
absolutely.
are the way they are today? It's because when colonialism collapsed, all that money and all that wealth that came from those nations didn't stay within those nations. And when the governments left and the financial stability left, the nations were left with nothing.
well, it was never meant for the nations to be. I
Right.
mean, you know, it's
Yeah.
certainly not for the people who were producing the wealth. And
Absolutely.
the demand was so high that the life expectancy, if you made it to Saint Domingue from the coast of Africa, if you made it, that means if you lived by
Survived.
and survived, and you were still alive by the time they pulled into port. Um, if you lived, you'd stand to live maybe another 5 to 7 years after you arrived, because and I can testify. I grew up around sugarcane. I grew up eating it, not all the time, but it was something, you know, sugarcane still grows in these islands. It's still, you know, and
Mhm.
I used to play around sugarcane and it was like nothing. Sugarcane is very tall. It's thick. It's, you know, just imagine like thicker bamboo. Bamboo is hollow. Sugarcane is not. And the work that it takes to harvest that is the whole term breaking work comes from sugarcane work.
Oh, wow.
That's
Hmm.
what it comes from, the
Yeah.
term, because the injury that you could have from just chopping it all, you know, down and loading it all up, it could, I mean, incredible physical demands and so forth. And there was constantly an influx of new Africans coming in to replace those who were dying. Um, because, like I said, 5 to 7 years after you arrive, if you lived, you know, that's your lifespan, and you can also imagine there was a lot of infertility as well. Women can't reproduce if you're
Under
out
those
doing that
stresses and stuff
under
like
those
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
stresses.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was a lot of replenishment of new people there, and and it just so happened that the way people were taken from the west coast of Africa, uh, or the demographics of people who were taken, a lot of people were warriors. They were people who were prisoners of war, who were fighters, and people who were organizers, and they were people who were chiefs and stuff like that. So you're constantly replenishing chiefs and organizers and warriors to come to Africa, come to Saint Domingue and chop cane. What do you think is going to happen after a
So
while?
that is actually the perfect segue because I was going to say, let's go ahead and fast forward to the actual revolution. And what's phenomenal about that, like versus the American Revolution, where it was North against South and predominantly white fighters
Hmm.
on both sides, right?
Hmm.
This revolution was led by the black slaves. And
Yes.
so that is very unusual in like the history of slavery and stuff like that. That what
The only
happened.
one. It's the only
Yeah.
successful slave revolt in history that's resulted in a nation.
So
And it happened prior to, the United States of America and the American Revolution, right? So
mhm.
at that time, we still had slaves at the time that, the Haitian Revolution happened. So that's significant. They weren't like, "Oh, hey, look at them over there. They're free." They were surrounded by slavery, and they did this all on their own.
Um, well, that's actually part of the reason why it took so. I mean, this is why I wrote the article.
Mhm.
Um, and I
Hmm.
the history is so sorted and so intertwined with American history. Thomas Jefferson, with our laws that were proposed for slave catchers and so forth and stuff like that. The merchants and the economy of American plantations and slave labor in many ways supported the plantations that were in Haiti. Another thing that I didn't mention is that when you've got so much of the land being used to produce coffee and sugar, you don't have a lot of space to produce other food that you need to survive and to support the workforce. And so there were a lot of there was a lot of trade uh, with American merchants that were producing goods with slaves or enslaved people, I like to say, in the United States to support the economy and the actual people producing sugar and coffee in Saint Domingue. So this was
Right.
an
Very
entire
intricate web of
yeah
yeah.
economic cycle.
Yes. Yeah.
And then also a lot of the people who would lead a lot of the wars and who also seem to be threatening to a lot of the plantation or the planters in uh, in Haiti would end up sometimes being shipped off to other neighboring islands and or traded between other colonies, the Jamaica, for example, English colony, because they were seen as a threat to the stability of the workforce. If they knew that, for example, let's say if it was me, like if you knew I was on the boat on the way to Saint Domingue, and you knew what kind of mind I had, you may not want me to step off the boat because I'm going to get some stuff started. And so there was a way of people knowing who certain folks were and saying, send that person to Jamaica. Don't bring them here. Or if you
Sure.
started
Yeah,
something,
they're gonna strategize where they're gonna
right,
send their toughest, smartest, strongest
right,
slaves. Yeah, they're not gonna.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot to study. And this is the point of the article. To just simply say revolution is a little too easy, especially for someone like me. And I started off by talking about me being from the Virgin Islands, not just to big up St. Croix, which is I like to do, but also because to highlight that this kind of stuff was going on all throughout the Caribbean. It was, and in the States, and in Brazil, and in Cuba. I mean, everywhere. Everywhere there were enslaved people, there were these revolts, there were these rebellions. In Colombia, same thing. There are in St. John in 1733, there's the thing called the St. John's Rebellion. Before, this is 90 something years before, 60 to 90 years before independence in Saint Domingue, which was now Haiti, was a rebellion in St. John in 1733 that resulted in that population of enslaved Africans holding St. John for 6 months. Now, it did not result in an independent nation, but it was essentially a successful run of essentially running out the plantation class and the enslaved people saying, we're revolting, we're not going to live like this. And they held that island for 6 months. There's so much history around all of this stuff. And in Haiti in specific, there were all sorts of negotiations going back and forth between France. There were 3 commissions, a tricolor commission. There were all kinds of characters along the way. You'll probably read about Toussaint Louverture, and he's certainly a key figure in this narrative. But there were also a lot of other key figures. There are a lot of other dynamics between colors and caste systems and social hierarchies between Blacks who were from Africa versus the Blacks who were born in Saint Domingue versus the people
And
who
that's
were
a good
mixed.
distinction too. Yeah.
And all of these
also
people needed to
the
be
black
managed.
people who had been fathered from white people who were now free black people.
Yes, those would be colors.
Yeah.
And there were
So-
the apartheid, essentially the politics of apartheid and the politics of racial categories. How does that work in creating a movement for liberation? Also, when you have to be mindful of these economic concerns, how are we, if we become independent, we still need to produce something. People still want to work. People still need to eat. We need to be able to trade. How are we going to do that? And so all of these things were super dense. It's
and
really
you're talking
dense
about the complication of revolution, where it's not just so simple as like turning a switch and things go from bad to good. And
That's
we do
my
need
point.
to move on to the next articles just to kind of keep us on time, not to be that person or anything.
No.
But
Check out the article, guys. Check out the article.
the article is phenomenal. And it's a really quick, very easy read, but you'll learn a lot. And Nate, I know you had some really good notes about it, so I'm going to give you closing statements on this one. I especially like what you said about the yellow fever epidemic and just what they were really up against.
Yeah, and one thing that stuck out to me when I was reading the article and sort of learning a little bit more about the Haitian Revolution was that how a pandemic played a big part, and the indifference of those in power until it was too late. And then I'm thinking back to people like Tucker Carlson and all these right-wing pundits putting out all this anti-vax nonsense, but at the same time, they're vaccinated. They're vaccinated, right?
Right.
It's just, people in power, those sorts of people in power don't really have to care, right? They're not going to do anything about climate change. They're not going to do anything about the yellow fever unless we make them.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm Spartacus.
That's awesome. Okay, so before we move on to the next article, we are going to take just a quick moment to look back on last week and see what we missed.
Yeah, I feel like you and I are on our way to like an escalating war of obnoxiousness to see who can get the best soundbite in each and every week. So now that we're both here, it's in competition.
The Pfizer vaccine and all the other ones are real. You guys should go get it if you haven't already. And I would say, yeah, you can stop watching the show and go get yourself an appointment to do that. I'm okay with that.
I had told you from the very beginning that this was a good idea. And don't you go showing me clips of me saying the opposite thing, because I'm just going to come up with some other bull.
I don't give a about Matt Dillahunty right now. All right? Let's forget about...
Matt.
Yeah, no well, you know what you can do, Matt.
The next time God shows up, ask him why he's a who will show himself to you, but not to me. And then ask him what number I'm thinking of and call me back.
Oh, Jenna's face when I'm doing my Lindsey Graham accent is just priceless.
I was just going to say, before I move on to introducing the next article, I just have to say, Nate, thank you so much for being a part of that looking back clip. That made my day.
Can I hear it just one more time? Just a little.
Just one more. You watch the replay later, Ro.
Oh,
watch the
okay.
replay later. We get early access to this episode, so
this is true.
Yeah. Okay, Article 3. So this one's kind of interesting because this article, which is titled "Talking to Science Deniers and Skeptics is Not Hopeless," and yet the article is all about how scientists are so much more reluctant today versus in the past to really engage with science deniers, like whether it's climate change or whether it's the epidemic or whatever. They just don't want to have the conversation anymore as a general demographic. Like, I'm sure there's those scientists out there that are still fighting the good fight. But what's interesting about this article is you think of like, so our atheist sort of community that we have here, this sort of online community that we all belong to, we're really big on the science geek stuff. Like we're really a bunch of science nerds. We're really out there like promoting science. And so for me to read this article, it was interesting to me because I kind of took for granted that I'm just the layman, and that Ro, you and Nate, you guys are just the layman. And the people who really need to be engaging, the ones who know what climate change really means and what the numbers really indicate, and the people who really know about the disease and stuff like that, and how to discuss COVID to those who are denying that all this is a thing, they're backing off, according to this article. And a lot of the reason that they say is, here's what one of the quotes is those people just aren't worth talking to. It wouldn't make a difference anyway. So guys, what do you think about this article and the whole idea that maybe scientists are getting a little jaded?
I'm sympathetic because, I'm reminded of that meme where there's conversation going on between a scientist and a layperson, and the person says, "Hold on, let me interrupt your expertise with my confidence."
Yes, with this thing I read on Google.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I can understand, but there is a need for science educators out there. There are some out there, like Neil deGrasse Tyson is a great example that I can think of.
I just listened to him today on Star Talk. Yeah.
Oh, he's so good. He's so good. I want to get his last books, Letters from an Astrophysicist. Looks really good. But I'm also reminded of the saying that when an honest person finds out they're wrong, they're either going to cease to be wrong or they're going to cease to be honest.
I like it.
I love that point. I was trying to find out who actually said it, but you know, on the internet, it's like, oh, it was Mark Twain, it was Abraham Lincoln, it's anonymous or whatever.
It was Copernicus, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, I wonder if maybe the left's proclivity to crucify ourselves for being wrong is sort of contributing to this epidemic of scientists and intellectuals ostriching and just burying their head in the sand. You know, because they are so afraid to be wrong, and God forbid, you know, you actually, it's either they get crucified by the left or they end up talking to someone, you know, your Uncle Frank, who's just like, ah, la, 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 I can't hear you.
And then they get
video."
annoyed. Yeah. Well, so according to this article, it has less to do with fear and more to do with the idea of this like backfire effect. And I don't know what you guys thought about this backfire effect. I had some issues with this part of the article. So I'm going to let you guys go first, and then I will tear it apart.
I had issues too. I had mixed feelings about this article, not because I don't trust that this method, you know, could be efficacious, but I found some practicality issues with it. For example, so there was a one quote where the person said, you know, he had spoken to vaccine resistant or you know, hesitant people, and he got to a point where he wanted to, I wrote this, let them wonder why they couldn't answer the questions. I thought that was interesting. And then there was another part where he said most science deniers don't have a deficit of information, but a deficit of trust. And so he was framing the conversation around not so much the objectivity of whatever the lesson is, but the idea of just the emotional aspect of people who are mistrustful of science and these types of conversations around vaccines and other things. And he talked about it, you know, the trust has to be built with respect and patience and empathy and interpersonal connections. Yes,
that's huge. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. It does have to be built, and it has to be framed as an emotional sort of conversation, much more so than it is currently in many ways.
Yeah.
But I also had issues, for example, with some of the remedies. So one of the remedies was, I believe, towards the end of the article, it talks about, you know, talk to your neighbors, you know, if you're a biologist, you know, and you
just keep sharing,
just keep sharing, you know, with somebody. And I was like, this presumes a whole lot about, you know, people in proximity to one another in terms of housing and in terms of location and all that we know about the segregation of our communities in terms of race and class and social economic realities and disparities. The idea that like it's just easy to just talk to your neighbor who's a microbiologist, right?
Yeah, right.
And then by extension, that will just spread like wildfire, and then everybody will know, right?
Yeah. I mean, as if
we live in these little bubbles.
Yeah, like I found that to be an issue of you know, is that practically, you know, like, is that practical?
It sounded like a lazy solution to me. It sounded like whoever was writing it or coming up with these solutions was like, well, gee, the solution is to just talk to someone about it.
And
it seemed a little too oversimplified.
And not just talk to, you know, your neighbor who's a nurse at the hospital, but talk to someone who's, you know, in epidemiology at, you know, Johns Hopkins. That level of expertise is just next door to you. Like when we think about the demographics and the realities of the parts of our population who are vaccine hesitant and vaccine deniers, there are implications for who those people are in terms of location, in geography, and you know, in housing and neighborhoods and so forth. and income barriers, right? So if you, let's say you got a minimum wage job and, you know, you're struggling, you've got 2 kids or whatever, and, you know, whatever your situation is, what's the likelihood that you're going to live next or even in proximity to someone who can educate you in that way, and or who will even pass you by in your daily routine to have that conversation.
Right.
And then there was another
much less engage, much
much-
less like initiate a conversation. Like, you're not going to go into Burger King and be like, "Did you know I just published a study in the Journal of Scientific Review?"
This
Does
is my
anybody want
point.
to talk to me about it? Yeah.
This is my point, you know, especially during the
It's a good
pandemic,
point.
because I might not even be in Burger King. I'm going to be in the drive-thru, and you won't even know that I came to Burger King because I'm in the car in front of you, you know.
It's a good point, Ro.
And then there was one other thing, which was another solution was to spend more time asking questions than offering explanations. And what I thought about with this was what we have seen for months. We've seen it on airplanes. We've seen it in the Burger Kings. We've seen it in the CBSs. We've seen it in the school board meetings. There is a safety implication for having these conversations at this point. There's a physical safety implication and a reason for people to feel hesitant about having those conversations with people, and especially between races and so forth. And as we see the school boards, you know, when it comes to CRT, when the school boards, when it comes to masking in certain parts of Texas, and people, there was something I watched the other day where at a school board meeting, the people who were advocating that this year, let's wear masks, at some point they left and got in their car, and there was a stampede. There was sort of like they surrounded the car and were yelling at the people who were in the meeting about, like, you know, you're not going to make our kids wear masks. Like, the guy couldn't get out of the parking lot.
Yeah, so I mean, I honestly think, and again, I think it's another lazy solution. I really think this person just thought in their head, like, oh, well, what would I do to make this easier? And honestly, so when we talk about like, oh, ask more questions and offer less explanations or whatever, I honestly think that whole concept is something that okay, so I don't think it's necessarily the right thing for the scientist to take on as, oh, I mean, it's great. It's like street epistemology, right? Great tactic. But
Exactly.
that really needs to be something that's instilled in people in
Early.
school or when they're
Early.
young. Yeah, that's
Early.
not something you tell the scientist necessarily. That's something you tell the person listening to the scientist, right? Like, hey,
Yes.
ask questions, be curious,
Yes.
right? So when you have a scientist that's just walking around on the street talking to
Yeah.
people, yes, if that avenue of communication just magically opens up and someone wants to talk to you about like anti-vaccine or whatever, and you can ask more questions, certainly, and offer less information in the moment. But you're not going to just walk around, like you said, to a school and necessarily do that when the other person's mind is closed off too, right? Like what you're talking about. Like it works up to a certain point in a certain situation. But
that was
ahead,
going to
Nate.
be my point, is that like scientists aren't walking around like Anthony Magnabosco with a clipboard and a timer, right? And the other thing is that, you know, street epistemology, like you said, it requires an honest interlocutor. You've got to have somebody who
Absolutely.
wants to be open to some new information. And the people that are the most prone to this backfire effect, they've already got their minds made up, and they don't want to talk to you if you disagree with them.
Yeah. So I wanted to say something really quickly about that backfire effect thing. And I want to get your
Please
guys'
do.
comments on it.
Please
and
do,
Nate,
yeah.
Nate, I want to hear from you first too, just to give you that opportunity. But it's okay, get this. And I'm going to quote the article here. It's grounded in the backfire effect, an irreproducible 2010 finding that people sometimes embrace misconceptions more strongly when faced with coercive information, implying that the pushing back against falsehoods is counterproductive. Okay, there was a lot problematic about that. Irreproducible, 2010, and people sometimes embrace misconceptions, right? So that whole the whole basis of this article being this whole backfire effect thing,
That
in and of
language
itself.
is so general and so like it's not clinical. Like how do you gauge that? Like as Malty says, what's the units on how much misconception you have? Right?
Yeah,
Like,
it lacks proportion and quantity when it talks about some of those things.
No data
like,
whatsoever.
How many My Pillow units do you have? Oh, dangerous. You're up to 75.
Right. And why is it irreproducible? Why can we not do additional studies on there's tons of psychological studies out there, and you can easily do a study on how people change their minds or dig in deeper when they're confronted with conflicting information. Like that should be a relatively simple study to reproduce. So when they're
Absolutely.
when they're talking about this, I right away I started to get really a little bit like skeptical, almost to the point of cynical about it. Like what
Same.
why are we even writing
Same.
this article to begin with this kind of study at the basis?
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat, and if I can present some anecdotal evidence, I work in construction. I'm a tradesperson, so you know that is a field that's dominated by cis men that generally, you know, people think of construction types as the rough and burly catcalling, but you know they're not as dumb as some people think. Like in the last 6 months, I've changed someone's mind about their bigotry towards trans people.
Ooh,
I've
nice.
convinced an anti-vaxxer to go get vaccinated.
Oh,
And these
wow.
are just conversations that I've had like while working, right? Like I wasn't really, you know, we weren't like sitting across a table with, you know, with the timer and doing the whole SE thing.
Mhm.
So, you know, it can be done. It's just that, again, you need to have an honest opponent, right? And like I always like to say that what makes liberal societies like ours so great is that we can disagree and we don't have to come to blows. You don't have to yell at each other. We can not agree on something and still have a conversation about it. And you know what? If you stick around long enough, I probably will change your mind.
Yeah, and so you touch on something that's actually like the upside of this article. So the one
Mm.
redeeming point in this article is that they do point out that there's evidence that rebuttals can be effective, right?
Mhm.
And so they do kind of turn it around a little bit and say, well, but there's this evidence over here, and I really think that that is something that you both keyed in on. That's important is that when you do talk to people, depending on how and how often and like how you conduct yourself, you really can make a difference. And I don't think it's like a here's this technique and that technique that will work for necessarily every single person, but it's just a matter of continuing to have the conversation. And so I think you
Mhm.
brought up a really good point, Nate. And I do want to point out that the article does bring that up. I think that it's a little flawed in its overall writing, but it does speak to the fact that yes, scientists may be afraid to approach people because they may be jaded, fearful, this whole, the study about the backfire effect. But rebuttals to bad reasoning can be effective if done correctly.
If I may add just a little to that, I also think that as a third possibility, and this may be too late. I think the boat may have sailed for COVID-19 and that. But I do think that there's something to be said for just representation, which is a lot of what we do. You know, all of us in our own work, and especially with mine and Black non-believers, um, the the conversations that you have that are not uh, predicated on anyone being convinced then
Mm,
um, also do a lot. And
yeah.
also
Bingo.
when you're
Bingo.
just, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And also when you're,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, sometimes just existing, not having anything to say, but just existing, um, can help. Now, I do think that with COVID-19 and this particular era of or iteration of vaccine hesitancy, I think that we're up against time, and I'm not sure if these. I'm not particularly hopeful, but I also would not be the person I think this article is directed to, because this is not my ministry, as they say. Um, but
We are none of us epidemiologists, that's
yeah,
for sure.
my sister, however, she has a master's in epidemic and public health, and I learned how to pronounce that word 10 years ago when she graduated because I hadn't ever heard of it. And
Bravo, good sir. Bravo.
yeah, and
Yes.
and so I think a lot of I said this a long time ago. I think a lot of people have taken for granted that that is its own subject, that's a
Oh, for
thing,
sure.
to study and to know about and to have knowledge about. It's not just something that came about in COVID-19 times. Um,
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we do
you
need
know,
to we need to move on to the next article. I do want to give Nate like a closing bit. And I say that because myself and Ro, like we've been talking a lot through these articles. I want to make sure that we're not steamrolling him. But
Oh
and Nate, you
no,
have
I've
awesome
been
stuff to say.
I've been getting my 2 cents in here and there.
Fantastic. You're happy, I'm happy.
No, I'm good. I mean, especially with Ro talking about Haiti, I mean,
Oh, for sure. It's
yeah,
fascinating.
the article that you wrote was so good, so I wanted to hear you talk about it a little bit more. And
Oh,
I'm a
thank
bit of a
you.
history nerd myself. I'm
Ah,
actually previously familiar with the story of the Haitian Revolution. I just
oh,
think it's a
good.
really cool story. So,
It
but
is. Yeah. There are a lot of
but
links to in that article. So for people who want to get started on just kind of looking up stuff,
mhm.
hopefully.
That's really good. Yeah. Awesome.
But if I could close my portion of the reaction to this article by just
Mhm.
saying, you're never going to change someone's mind by being a dick. So whether it's atheism, whether it's anti-vaxxer, whether it's doesn't matter what you're talking about, approaching the situation being charitable, being kind, and actually maybe trying to put yourself in that person's shoes, you know?
Yes. Empathy.
Yes, you know, treat the other person like they deserve to have their mind changed, and you'll be surprised at the reactions you get.
I love it. I love it. That's a great way to close out this article.
Mhm.
Okay, so before we move on to our last article, which I am really tickled to talk about, I want to I just want to throw out really quick though different ways that you can support the nonprofits. We do have a Patreon page at patreon.com/the nonprofits. And you can also support just the ACA in general in many different ways. But one way in which you can do that, if you already shop on Amazon, is going to smile.amazon.com and then just selecting the atheist community of Austin as the beneficiary. So what it'll do, it'll take a portion of that purchase and it'll donate it to the ACA. Any way that you contribute to us, whether it's on Patreon or directly to the ACA or through any of these other means, it's really appreciated. So thank you. One other thing really quickly is feedback. That's something that we just can't get enough of. So if you have any questions or comments, and not something that you're putting in the live chat, like if it's not something about this show particularly, but maybe in general, go ahead and email us at the nonprofits at atheist-community.org. Okay, so as with all of our shows, and I think that Ro touched on this just a moment ago when he was talking about his article and the links in his article. All of the links for today's topics are going to be in the description below. So feel free at any time to go and read the articles, add in the chat any of your contributions to it. And we'd love to hear what you have to say about it, but it'll also help you in better understanding all these things that we're talking about. So having said that, Nate, why don't you go ahead and take the very last article and introduce it to us?
Why don't I?
Just go for it.
My favorite part of the show is the comedy segment, I have to say. And then get thee behind me, Ronald news. We have the second week in a row that our classic piece comes to us from the lovely people of Russia. So we have
Russia.
Oh, Russia. We have one Ksenia Ovchinnikova, this Orthodox Christian from Omsky, Russia. She is suing McDonald's because she is giving up meat for Lent. Orthodox Christian, she gives up meat for Lent. She see McDonald's commercial, this delicious cheeseburger. Goes in for to buy this cheeseburger, eats it, feels bad, feels this guilt. And this McDonald's fault for being so delicious. So she is suing McDonald's for 1,000 rubles, which is about $13. Yes, she is actually suing McDonald's because she ate a cheeseburger and it's their fault. Wow.
And but do you remember what the $1,000 is for?
Yes, it's for sustained moral damage. Yes.
Moral damage. Yeah,
Yes,
which I did not know was a
Moral
thing.
damage.
Moral damage. So I know I can inflict moral damage on myself, like if I were to say cheat or steal or do something that I found morally reprehensible. It's new to me that somebody else could inflict moral damage onto me. So I'm gonna have to rethink all of my interactions.
Soviet Russia, moral damage hurts you.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like of all the things that are demoralizing in Russian law right now, that's the thing that you're going to sue for. Like you're going to go to court for that. You know, a couple of years ago, we just got finished with the Olympics. You know, a couple of years ago, it was Sochi. You know, and all of the sort of oppression and the literal camps that gay people were secret camps, gay people were being thrown in.
Oh yeah.
You know, and that was the big thing. By the way, from what we all know, I think they're still doing that. You know, it hasn't gone away. You know, you could disappear mysteriously and end up in a camp, if not dead. Not even because you're gay, but because someone thinks you might be gay. And so
Right, yeah.
when I think about all the things like that are oppressive about, and I'm sure Russia is got its wonderful charms, but I'm wondering, like, is McDonald's that's your number one thing to do?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
concerned over. Well, okay, so when I wrote my notes for this article, I'm gonna read my notes here because this is the first thing I wrote. I wrote, I almost wanted to call the BS flag on this one, roll my eyes and move on. And then I realized people are notorious for not taking responsibility for their own actions.
Mhm,
And the title of this article suggests no different. Right. So
mhm,
that was my very first thought before even reading the article is
mhm.
really all this boils down to is it's too often that we allow people the opportunity to not take responsibility for their own actions to the point where they think that something like this is justified.
I wrote I wrote a similar thing in reaction to this because I've been a Christian for a long time.
Yours is
You know,
funny too. I should read yours.
yeah. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you know, I was a Christian for about 30 years, and I thought Lent was about personal responsibility. I thought that's the time to exercise it.
And part of that involves having those sorts of like tests put in front of you. Like
Yeah,
what is
uh,
the point of Lent if you just put yourself into a bubble
yeah,
where there's no meat available to begin with? You're
yeah.
not even able to access it.
Yeah,
Like, that's the
she should be
point.
watching Taco
Yeah.
Bell commercials, really.
Honestly, yeah, part of it is that element of self-denial and deprivation and like self-control. Yeah,
It's an
absolutely.
excellent point. Yeah. I want to know why this lady's immortal soul is only worth $13. Like, I'm Tolstoy that legal professionals are quite expensive. So, like, what's to gain by putting in this lawsuit against one of the largest fast food chains in the
I
world?
heard that.
Right?
I
Like,
heard that.
I think she might just be stalling for
Very funny.
time or Trotskying out the same old devil date made me do it argument. And I just hope this gets Khrushchev'd in court.
I just
I'm not
hope
letting this take another minute.
I hope when she gets to court, she gets fried.
Mm. Oh, it's a
Yeah, I like it.
preposterous lawsuit. Like it's gonna get thrown out of court. It
You'd
has
hope,
to.
you'd
Wait.
hope, but I mean, don't. More ridiculous things have happened.
It costs more than $13 to put gas in the tank to get to the courthouse.
Right.
So by the
Mm.
time you get there, like
The money you're spending just in filing the paperwork to begin with.
yeah, like I mean, you've made it even. Like it's nullified. So why even file it?
Something tells
Yeah,
me
yeah.
this particular litigant will be representing themselves.
Oh,
Just
Potentially.
yikes!
Yeah.
And like I
Okay.
said, you think about what's the guy? I forgot. I can't say his name right, but you know the candidate that was going to run against Putin that's now in jail, who almost died a couple months ago and stuff like that. Like,
funny that, yeah.
you know, like why don't you you're too scared
Sue to have him free.
Yeah, well, maybe not sue, but like put your efforts towards helping
Towards
him.
Yeah.
You know, instead of trying to get out of accountability for eating a damn hamburger.
So there's the part of me that's curious about her intentions, and I know that there's no way of determining that, but there's a part of me that's like, you're kidding, right? Like you're doing this for attention, right? Like, but then there's the part of me that's like, no, she could be dead serious. Like she could have like some serious, like Orthodox Christian guilt. Like I don't know.
She's a Russian Karen.
Yeah, she's such a care. What would that be in Russian, Nate?
Yeah, what is it, Nate?
I am not sure.
Come
I'm
on,
not sure.
you know it. You know it.
I'm afraid I do not, comrade. The Russian for Karen is Karina? Maybe
Yeah,
Karina?
Oh, I
Karina.
like it,
Yeah.
Karina.
This is
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Okay,
that's good.
so there's this snark in me though. Okay, so she's saying that her religion makes her feel guilt to the point where she needs reparations for the moral damages that she suffered. Okay, but what I want to know is, and this is the snark in me here, but what I want to know is all that guilt and shame that was imposed on me while I was religious, do I sue for moral damages from the church for all the guilt and shame that I experienced and the moral damages that I suffered while I was religious?
You bring up a good point
Mhm.
because it
Class
seems like
action.
It also seems misdirected. It seems like, according basically what you're saying is you would sue the church. Why doesn't she sue the church for making her feel guilty about eating a sandwich?
Right. Why is it McDonald's? Yeah. I mean, I felt guilty just for being human, for being me, right? And so who do I sue for that?
Maybe because the church is the one entity that actually has more money than McDonald's. Could that be why?
Or she fears the church more than she fears McDonald's. It's kind of like you don't go to the bully on the playground. You go to the kid that you know you can beat up.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder. I wonder if maybe she thinks that, like, if she wins, she'll be absolved in God's eyes because she won the court case, and there's a lot of it's almost a cult of personality over there, so maybe that's it. And then another thing that occurred to me is, like, why are we hearing about this? Like, I read this article in the Toronto Sun, and I'm like, I wonder if, like, this is like a fluff piece that's been sort of publicized and sensationalized by the Russian media to distract from some of those other issues that Ro was talking about. Could that
it might be? It might be. I heard someone in business say that McDonald's puts out these kinds of things in a secret way to sort of drum up some sort of buzz around McDonald's.
So are you saying this is more about McDonald's and getting the advertising out of the article than it is about her?
Like it's sort of a secret marketing strategy,
I would actually buy that more than I would buy a woman who literally felt that she was owed money for feeling guilty.
Can gay people in Russia sue can they sue like a hot dog company if they suck a dick or something? I don't understand.
I mean, apparently you can sue for anything in Russia if you sue for.
I mean, you can sue for anything here too. So let's be real.
Yeah, true. You just won't win.
But make it for more than $13 though. Like,
is that because like the hot dog is like phallic and gave them the idea?
That's
what you're getting at.
Yeah, that's why I said hot dog.
Like, I got you.
He's saying it implanted a thought in their head. Therefore, it's not their fault. Therefore, sue the hot dog. Yeah, I honestly think that there's a lot about this that A, it's just ridiculous. B, I can't tell if it's even fraudulent or not. I like the idea that maybe it's just McDonald's trying to get some, because you know how they say like any publicity is good publicity.
I think that they want us at some point after this is over to be like, I think I'm gonna go to
I kind of do want a McDonald's cheeseburger now.
Yeah.
I mean, I usually eat dinner after recording these, so at this point, I will take anything from McDonald's.
I think that might. I don't know. I don't have any answers, guys. I don't.
I mean, the bottom line, and we'll end on this. I mean, it's kind of a fun note to end on. But bottom line is that it's an interesting thought conversation. So for me, it's interesting to think about. So for me, when I first read it, I was like, okay, moral damages, interesting concept. So we can take this whole thing and make it an interesting thought experiment on the whole idea of when you're motivated to do wrong, or when your morals are somehow, I don't know,
so
wounded.
So
who's really responsible for that, right? For me, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I had a thought too, like, because they're on the Orthodox calendar, which is a different calendar. I mean, like, she could just be Protestant and it wouldn't be Lent anymore.
I mean, that's true. Right?
So they celebrate. Right, like you got to get out of jail free card. I mean, Jesus died for your sins. You can have a McDonald's hamburger, whatever.
I mean, that would be kind of like the bottom line, right? Is you know that you adhere to a religion where Jesus forgives all sins, and all you need to do is believe in Him, and it's all good. So eat that burger, feel some good, healthy guilt about it, have a couple nights of losing sleep, maybe, and then pray to Him and get over it.
I mean, and then think of the meat. Think of the cows. I mean, you're talking about moral damage. I mean, that's the moral damage, the way they produce that
Ouch,
meat.
now you're taking it on a whole different route. Yeah.
No, sorry.
Oh, I don't think we have time for that, Ro.
Close it out, Laura. Because
actually, it is time to close out. So Nate, Ro, closing thoughts. Give me each of your guys' closing thoughts in just a couple minutes or less.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm suing you.
Oh, okay.
I love it. Oh, you remember that? I'm loving it. That was the old slogan.
It's old school, and I love it. Okay, awesome. Well, let's just go ahead and close it out with that, because I don't think we can end on a higher note than I'm loving it.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we should all three sing it. You guys want to do it?
3-part harmony.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
I'm loving it.
Oh,
you
Ro just
chased me.
owned us. Owned us.
That was good, Ro.
I was
Wow.
trying to take the top notes.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So, all right. So thank you guys both for joining me. This is my first time working with Ro. Nate, I do know you from previous conversations, and I'm really tickled to have gotten the chance to work with you today. And thank you guys all.
Talk to you as both as well. So
Oh, I'm looking forward to working with you more in the future, Ro, for sure. Yeah. I love this.
Likewise.
Okay. And audience, thank you guys for listening. I know you guys have been in the live chat. Thank you for that. I hope that I was in there too. And yeah, everybody just enjoy the next program we have, which is anybody? Atheist Experience. Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Never
Who's
heard
the
of it.
host?
Check it out. Check it out. This Mike Dial.
Mike?
I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah,
I don't
Mike
know. I don't
It's
even.
with a D. Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you guys all. Don't forget to like and subscribe and support us. Peace out, and I will see you guys next week.
Bye.